Welcome to Out of My Mouth, the program where raw thoughts meet unfiltered conversations.
Join us as we dive into the depths of human experience, where we share stories, perspectives, and insights that just might challenge the status quo.
Get ready to laugh, cry, and ponder the world around you like never before. This is Out of My Mouth.
The views and opinions of our guest and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of New Thought Media Network, or any organization we may be affiliated with. Here at New Thought Media Network, we welcome freedom of speech and courageous conversations. There are many topics that can be difficult to navigate. Challenging the status quo and engaging in lively debate is important to expanding our understanding of one another, and life in general. Creating a peaceful world doesn't happen because no one disagrees, it happens from a willingness to understanding one another. In our programming, we strive to expand consciousness and assist people in creating remarkable lives. Your comments are welcome at info@ntmedia.org.
Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world, maybe even good morning. You're watching Out of My Mouth on the New Thought Media Network, and I'm Barbara Jean.
And I'm Marg.
And I'm Cheryl.
And Marg,
Great to be
give
here.
us the land acknowledgement.
Yes, I will. Thank you. In the spirit of reconciliation and peace, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet on these sacred lands. We thank the generations of people who have taken care of the land for thousands of years. We recognize our oneness. We realize our history. We choose to create a new reality. Please, let's do that. We are one. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Yes, and it is my my honor and my privilege today to introduce Rev Ogun Holder, and he is here for part 2 of deconstructing New Thought. Last week we had to start without him, and he joined us a little late, and so we are so happy that he could come back today and join us again. And for those of you that don't know Rev Ogun, he's the co-founder of Project Sanctus. He's an ordained unity minister, an award-winning author, and he holds certification in spiritual coaching, grief and bereavement counseling, and the Enneagram. He's also one of the hosts of Pub Theology Live, a weekly podcast on life, culture, faith, meaning, and identity. A co-host too of With Love and Justice for All, a podcast about embodied antiracism, dismantling oppression, fostering liberation, and the special challenges that arise as spiritual seekers. So there is so much more, and I invite you to go to the website, his website, to read up more about him if you're interested in all that he's doing. And I'm thrilled because I really love how you, Rev Ogun, encourage us to think differently, to consider things we may not have thought of before, and just coming from a lived experience of what many of us, I'll say Caucasian settlers, I don't know what we're called anymore, don't know, right? And so I know that it's not your place to educate us, but I think that the work you're doing is doing that in a powerful way, and that's important.
Thank you for having me back. And actually, I did volunteer to educate. I mean, that's why my partner and I, Kelly Isla, We refer to ourselves as partners in crime, co-creation, and consciousness. This is why we founded Project Sanctus, to be a platform for education around anti-racism, around decolonizing, around social justice, specifically for folks in, not limited to, but specific, but also tilted towards, leaning towards folks who are spiritual seekers and in spiritual communities. We are both ordained ministers in unity. We both served in churches. And what we realized was that there was this sort of, I think, misconception that because we were spiritual folk and we engaged in spiritual practices, that did not, people assumed that that meant that they were exempt from being racist, sexist, transphobic, ableist, ageist, all the isms and the ists, right?
Right.
We assume that as unity folk, because we, walk around reciting the mantra and believing the mantra, I behold the Christ in you, I see your divinity, that it made us exempt from the human element of things.
Right.
So part of our work has been to say, no, it is not.
Yeah.
There's other work we need to do. We can do that within a spiritual context through a spiritual lens, but there's specific work to do to, as we say, decolonize. Earlier in your introduction, I don't know if you realized, you said deconstruct. You thought, we're not trying to deconstruction and decolonizing. There's some overlap there, but they're not the same thing.
That's funny. Out of my mouth.
Yeah. Maybe you're going through your own personal deconstruction. That was a little bit of a Freudian slip there. But yes, so it's and when we say decolonizing, and I didn't really define this well the last time I was on, it's really the idea of investigating, realizing the impact that colonization has on our thought, our beliefs, our existence, our way of being. And when we say colonization, we mean it both in the literal sense. Then a foreign power comes and invades, and colonizes, and sets itself up as the authority, but also in a metaphorical sense, some years later since that colonization actually happened. And how it shows up a lot right now in many ways is under a broad umbrella of whiteness. And this is where people tend to get sensitive. When I say whiteness, I don't mean necessarily white people. So whiteness is that idea of superiority, that idea of entitlement, that idea of white. The way of being white is the standard, and because it is the standard, because it is in the culture both overtly and subtly, we all internalize it. Even me as a person of color, I for many years I internalized that whiteness was a thing I needed to aspire to, and I changed myself to fit into white spaces more. I'm from Barbados, and I remember when I first came to the US in college, my accent was very, very, very strong. I sounded like, as we would say, pure Bajan. Bajan is the colloquial term you would give for someone from Barbados. And people had trouble understanding me. So I joke when I said instead of speaking English, I learned to speak American. So, different vocabulary, different accent, different ways to emphasize words. And I thought I did this from a place of seeking to be understood. It would take me quite some time later to realize, no, I did it to assimilate. I did it to fit in, and also, again, unconsciously believe that was my path to, again, those standards of whiteness and success, rather than holding strongly onto my own cultural identity as well.
Right.
So So when we talk about decolonizing, we're looking at the ways that all the standards of whiteness, which come out of white supremacy, all the ways that capitalism, all the ways that patriarchy, those big umbrella systems of oppression have made their way into all of our lives and all of our cultures and in spiritual spaces as well.
Yeah.
And so, we belong to a movement as Unity. Are all you all affiliated with Unity? I just want to make sure I'm not making this up.
We are, and Barbara is also affiliated with CSL.
Perfect. So we belong to a New Thought denomination that, for example, welcomes and ordains people and welcomes congregants regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation. However, that doesn't mean that sexism and misogyny does not exist within these cultures, right? That doesn't mean that homophobia or transphobia doesn't exist within these spaces. That doesn't mean that relationship stigma doesn't exist within these spaces, right? So, like in our culture, monogamy is the standard, but you would think when you have a spiritual community that says all are welcome here, someone who is non-monogamous or polyamorous or has a different relationship orientation would just be as welcome. Trust me, they're not. And as a minister and a person who is polyamorous, when I speak about it in spaces, people are very uncomfortable. When I speak about racism, especially in predominantly white spaces, people are very uncomfortable because we don't talk about the things that make us feel uncomfortable. And that desire to always maintain the status quo of comfort, that is a characteristic of whiteness as well.
Yes.
And soothing over that guilt that I might feel by making people uncomfortable, and that's also a characteristic of whiteness as well, of internalizing that. And you can draw a straight line to the days of enslavement, when in order to, in some cases, literally stay alive, you had to make sure that your enslaver always felt comfortable and at ease. So it's been a learned practice. So when we talk about decolonizing our spaces, especially for folks like myself, BIPOC folk, Black and Brown folk, it's about, or anyone that doesn't fit within that norm of whiteness, the white, straight, predominantly male spaces. We have to kind of take a look at how we just lean into making other folks feel comfortable. White folks feel comfortable as well. So that, like, that's an example of my work to do as a person raised in a patriarchal society as a man. I am the main perpetrator of sexism and patriarchy. And to this day, as much work as I've done around that, the women in my life could point out to you just in the last few months how I have said some things that let me know I still have some work to do, right? Because it's unconscious, it is deep, it is part of my original programming, and not that I chose to be. I actually just wrote an article for Spirituality and Health, their website. It's gonna come out tomorrow. I think they're gonna publish it tomorrow.
Cool.
About how we men in spiritual spaces bring a lot of harm in, because we assume that, we are spiritual men, we meditate, we do yoga, we are in touch with our divine feminine, and therefore we are not perpetrators of harm. And I point out that no, there's a lot of spiritual teachers and gurus who are men who are serial abusers and take advantage of their position to exert dominance and sexual power over women, right? Why is that? Because we haven't worked on the patriarchy that's been programmed within us. And for us men, that shows up as entitlement, that shows up as this idea that we see women as conquests. And even if intellectually we've gone by, we don't longer think that. there's still maybe a subconscious idea of those things running through us.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And then from the other side, I mean, that's why I love what you do, because it engages people to have conversations and to really go deep with those conversations. And
Yes.
I think what you and Kelly do, and Kelly's a white woman, if anybody doesn't know, is you create a safe container for these conversations to take place. And so, and I can't speak for my colleagues here, but for myself, first of all, I can relate to some of that as an immigrant, even though I am white. I can also, I also can say that I come with obviously my own conditioning, but also discomfort, because I've always believed that I'm not a racist. And yet, because of my environment and the way I've grown up, I know that I've said and done things that have been what they call, I think, microaggressions. And I wasn't aware of that. So I'm sometimes even afraid, I'm like, okay, so what are we, white colonists? I didn't know what to call us, right? So sometimes I'm also feeling very uncomfortable in that way of how do I be in that space? And I know that, I think you've said before, if you say something, somebody will say something, and that will let you know for future reference, right?
Yes.
Just sharing that discomfort, and just wishing at some point that I will be comfortable in my own skin to have these conversations without that.
Exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what creates that level of comfort is getting to know more and more people that are trans or BIPOC or what, as we expand our community, instead of it just being white, we're actually going into spaces where we're interacting with other people, and we start to see that there really isn't a difference between us. And yet there's vast differences. And I think as white people, especially, I was born in a predominantly white city in a very conservative province. And here in Canada, it's, you think it's pretty easy here, but it isn't. And I noticed all of my biases when I was working in a Black church. It's like you say something, and hopefully people will tell you. Sometimes they won't, because you're the reverend. But luckily, I had a couple people in my community who would go, yeah, you can't say that. But it's up to us to do some reading and some research and to discover our own biases, because we have them. They were trained, I was trained into this whiteness. And so we don't always notice the things that are really quite harmful. And, even when going into a hotel during COVID, and they had a white container and a Black container for the pens. Well, where the white, those were the clean pens, and the Black is that. When I threw the pen in, and then I went, oh my gosh. I became aware after I did it, because it's conditioned. So I think we all have something, and it's important to do this work.
Yeah,
it is. You sorry, I want to throw in a stat real quick. You mentioned about expanding, having diverse friend groups. They did a survey 2 years ago. PRRI did a survey 2 years ago, and 90% of white Americans don't have people, non-white folks, in their close friendship circles. Think about that for a second. 90% don't have non-white folks, or folks of another race within their core friendship group.
Yeah.
So basically, it's an echo chamber, right? And this doesn't make them bad people. No one's saying that. But what it does is it doesn't introduce them to what they don't know.
Yes.
or
Yes.
whether what they're saying or doing is causing any racial harm in other places
Exactly.
where folks won't speak up
and they don't
towards
realize
them.
it. Yeah.
Exactly.
One of the things for me that I grew up in South Africa, whites are a minority there, but I grew up in an apartheid era, which makes a big difference as well. And I've always had, African friends and colleagues, and I've always been comfortable in those environments. It's very different, though, in America, because there's a cultural difference as well, right? So there's that piece. I have a lot of gay, lesbian friends, and I used to go to gay clubs, even though I was straight. I loved going to gay clubs. I don't know why, when I was a teenager. And my sister's married to a woman and things like that. Even with all that exposure, I still don't really learn a lot. I learn a little bit, right? But I can say something even in those environments, and somebody will look at it, and I'm like, what did I say?
Right. Exactly. And what we also find is that some people will do what you just did as proof that they don't need to do any work, right? I've got black friends, I've got gay friends, I've got this, I've got that. We call that credentialing.
But I'm not saying that. I'm saying that though I still know that I have a ton to learn.
Yes, that's why I said folks will do what you did as an excuse to say they don't need to do the work, right?
Yeah.
And no different than the folks in spiritual communities who say, or churches who say, because, we are spiritual, because we're Christian, because we know all these spiritual practices, because we live from love, we don't need to do this work as well. So I think it's incumbent upon us to also look at how our spiritual teachings kind of reinforce that as well. And I think I touched upon this a little bit last time, and this is where sort of the deconstruction part comes in, right? So deconstruction is we're breaking a thing down. Usually we say it's us, the individuals, who are deconstructing, like when we find out some deeper truths about our faith, or the truth of the history about our movement or our scriptures, and then we begin to question the whole faith, and then it starts to break down, and sometimes it results in us leaving our faith or finding a different adaptation of our faith, or whatever. But we have a lot of, in unity, a lot of, I like to say, official and unofficial teachings, right? So an official teaching will be like a 12 powers. I'm going to assume most of the audience I'm talking to are unity folk, and they know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to expand, the 12 powers, the 5 principles, those sort of universal things. But then we have some, what I like to call some unofficial unity teachings. Things like, it's not ours to set it right, it's ours to see it right. Other teachings like whatever we resist persists. So therefore we're not gonna push back against anything. We're not going to speak out against anything, because to speak about it gives it power, and that sort of stuff. So we use some of these unofficial teachings as a way to spiritually bypass the discomfort and the challenge of doing our work. So I remember, for example, a little bit this time too, but more so the first time Trump was running for president. And as we, were getting closer to the election, and he kept, no matter what scandal or anything he said, he continued to rise in popularity until he got the nomination. And I wrote a piece that said, on my blog, that said, he's going to be our next president, and his presidency will be sort of like a catalyst for the nation's chemicalization of sorts.
Okay.
And the amount of pushback and objections that I got for writing this, and one of the things that people were saying is, you're right in this. If we keep saying this, we're going to bring it into manifestation. And I'm like, but that's not how this works, right? At all. The only way he's going to become president is if people vote for him.
Yeah.
Right. And but that's what I talk about when I say let's look at how our teachings have been understood and how they're taught. And then also, again, I don't remember if I said this last week or not, but I did mention this in the article, how it's, I think, incumbent upon us, those who are teaching these principles, to again realize there's these spiritual and absolute realm aspect of these teachings that are universal, but our human experience is not universal because of systems of oppression that are put in place. Right. Women are no less on the spiritual absolute level any less abundant or prosperous than men are, but we still have this massive pay gap that exists between genders. Right. Is that because you didn't learn the teachings well or manifesting them well? No, it's about systemic issues. So we have to address those at that level. So it's the both and. We teach a lot of both and in our teachings. We do. Be a spiritual student, a spiritual practitioner, but also be a human one as well. One doesn't supersede the other. And I think that's part of where the confusion comes in, because we kind of have this understanding that things in the spiritual are, I don't want to say better than, but they're higher than, they're greater than, they're more important than things in the human realm. So we assume that all we got to do is do our spiritual work, and the human realm stuff will take care of itself in our lives. And again, that's not how that
that's works. A piece of it, right? Because I think what we forget is that there's a collective consciousness creating. It's not just the individual consciousness, right? There's that network of how we are connected and how we are one, and how we co-create this reality.
And also, the spiritual teachings should lead me into activism. So if I'm saying I see the Christ in you, that at our core, fundamentally, we are the same, then why are we not having the same human experience? So now if I'm a place where I can help facilitate that, I should be working to have you have the same human experience, because fundamentally you're the same as I am. Right. But sort of what we have used sometimes, that I see the Christ in you.
I'd rather say light. I see the light in you.
The light in you, the divine in you, the love in you, whatever word works best.
How about I see you?
But that's different, because what people sometimes have used, that I see the light, the divine, the love in you, as an excuse to not see the experience of you and what you are going through, right? It causes us to look past that and feel good about ourselves, and not go like, you're not having a good life experience. What's happening there? As opposed to, you're divine, you got all the same attributes that I do. So if you're having a crappy life experience, do your spiritual work, right? What's in your consciousness? What do you need to do to shift that? And from the both and perspective, there's some of that there too, but that's not the entirety of it. And it doesn't relinquish me of my responsibility to do not just my work, but to find out, am I contributing to the, the oppression that you're encountering? Am I perpetuating the harm? What can I do to help, create that space of equity and justice? And, I think it's Cornel West that said, justice is love in action. So how am I living that? How am I bringing that about? And it can be in big ways. It can be in small ways. It can, it's individual. It's your small community collective. It's in your spiritual community. This past, it was July. There was conference at the Village. People of African Descent New Thought Group had a conference called Celebrating Your Soul, and it's was primarily geared towards BIPOC folk within New Thought communities. So Unity, CSL, Agape, UFBL, all those places. And one of the things I led a workshop. Reverend Kelly and I did an affinity group workshop. All right. And as I discussed last week, when folks showed up for that workshop, she took all the white folk and I stayed with everyone else, and we had the discussion in separate spaces. And the stories that people told about the both micro and macro aggressions that they experienced in their unity churches was breathtaking. And we're at a place where some of those communities are able to hear and listen and are implementing changes, and some of them are in communities where it's like, we don't hear you, we don't see you, we're not gonna do anything. I remember there were some churches that didn't want their Black members to have an affinity group where it's just them gathering. And I mentioned this last week, and they were like, that's divisive, and that's causing separation. And I'm like, we separate all the time. We separate by gender. We separate by age. We separate by sexual orientation and identity in our churches. And we have groups for those, and nobody says anything about them. In fact, they're encouraged. Why can't we encourage groups around race? That's because we haven't gotten comfortable with race yet. We've gotten comfortable with different genders. We've got comfortable with different ages, even though many of us still have internalized ageism, right? We're comfortable with that, but because we're not comfortable with having conversations around race. So that's why I'm here. As I say, my mantra as a minister is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So I've been doing a lot of afflicting of folks that really got too comfortable in these spaces.
Well, may I say you have a lovely way of doing it, though, Ogun.
It's time for
you know what? Thank you for that. Not everyone would agree with you. That's okay.
Well, let's take a commercial break. We're a little past our halfway point, and you're watching Out of My Mouth on the New Thought Media Network, and our wonderful guest, Reverend Ogun Holder, and we will be back in just a minute, so don't go away.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center, Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living, La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living, North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living, Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please come be you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring. New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Welcome back to Out of My Mouth and our wonderful guest, Reverend Ogun Holder. And we're talking about decolonizing New Thought. One of the organizations that I volunteer with, we're looking at changing our governance. So decolonizing the governance of the whole organization, which is getting a little bit of pushback because of being a nonprofit in Canada. But we're looking at creating space so that the people that we serve are the ones who are leading or guiding how we do what we do in order to meet their needs. And it's been quite a large project, I gotta say, but we're really enjoying the work. And I'm loving what you're talking about today because it's very, very helpful in all that we're doing.
I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Ogun, you mentioned BIPOC, and I don't know the term.
So it's an interesting term that some people aren't necessarily proud of, or aligned with, but is Black and Indigenous people of color. So it's kind of like a catch-all term for folks who are non-white. And not everybody who is Black or Indigenous or a person of color aligns or appreciates that terminology.
Right.
So yes, but that's what it means. So there was, you said an interesting thing about decolonizing your
Governance,
your governance and what that might look like. So diversity. I didn't come up with the thing I'm about to say, and I'm going to paraphrase it badly, but I love it so much. So diversity asks who's at the table, right? And inclusion makes sure that different voices are at the table, and equity ensures that the voices at the table are heard and taken seriously. Decolonization asks who built the table in the first place and who is it serving, right? Because if you don't question that, no matter who you have at the table, it's still going to be serving in many ways that original purpose, and that original purpose may be in many ways unconsciously perpetuating harm and not serving everyone.
Absolutely.
And that can be challenging for folks because they want to think that what, especially in spiritual spaces, what they created never causes harm to anyone, right? It's not as simple as that.
No. It's not simple. And, I'm really grateful for the group of individuals that are on the board because it is a very diverse group. And the community we serve is largely the BIPOC community. And so we're finding that it's the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation. And we're finding that many of our white members who used to be, the cream of the crop are feeling a little disenfranchised. So we're looking at how do we create the space where everyone feels, equity and inclusion, because it is, some of the people are feeling like they're not being, integrated in the same way, or it's probably their discomfort as white people being in a predominantly BIPOC space because of immigration and stuff. Most of our people are from either Africa or the Caribbean. And so a lot of those white people who were initially, using our services, they're now feeling a little bit off. So we're looking at how we navigate that. But what we're trying to do is knock down that table and reconstruct it. Because that's beautiful. That's we've been at it for 3 years now, and we got a ways to go, but I'm going to get on your website and see what's there, because I'm really excited about the work you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
You were talking earlier about seeing somebody through their experiences, again, paraphrasing. I know that you have traveled. Was it for the last year you were traveling?
So for the last 2 years, I've been a nomad.
Okay. I didn't know whether nomad was a proper term to use, so I avoided saying it. I just wonder if you came across presentations, different tables, because you were in different locations that would have different communities that would respond in different ways. So did your table look the same?
So are you, to be clear about what you're asking, you mean if I went to different churches or different countries or
just, yes, were you in different countries, and did you present yourself in a different way depending on the table you were sitting at?
I see what you're saying. So the short answer is yes, but it's like anything else, is a more nuanced answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I show up in a space, out of habit as a Black person, first thing I always notice is how many other Black folk are here, right? Like, am I in the majority? Am I in the minority? And is it a predominantly male space, predominantly female space, or queer space? Like, I notice the space that I'm in, because depending on the space I'm in will determine how I show up. And depending on who's in the room will depend on how I show up, and whether I need to be more forward or take more of a step back. So if I'm in a space as a man, and a more hetero identifying man, as I step into a space, for example, I more now am mindful to allow women's voices and the queer voices to have more space and time than me lending my voice, right? So one of the traits of patriarchal masculinity is that male entitlement to be heard, and men thinking, we got the answers, right? And not listening, and assuming credit for solutions and answers you didn't put forward. It's how many women can attest to being in a workplace and putting something forward only later for a man to say the same thing 2 minutes later and receiving all the credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's like, oh, okay, this is a space where they're asking for voices, and we got a mix of voices here, and there's women in the room, there's queer folk in the room. I am, as a straight man, gonna step back a little bit. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm in that room and it's predominantly white folk in the room, I'm going to try and step forward a little bit more to make sure that me, as a Black person, my voice is being heard as well. So there's always this kind of like dance of back and forward, depending on the space I'm in. And when we talk about decolonizing spaces, that's another aspect of it, right? Who are the voice? How have we understood our voice and the place of importance in our voice, the privilege that our voice brings? And one of the things that we teach is be aware of your privilege, but don't use it as a point of guilt or shame. Use your privilege as a point of power. So, for example, yes, you do your stepping back when you need to. I'm conscious, like I just said, as a man, the default is for my voice to be heard and believed. So let me lower my voice a little bit and step back. But also, as a man who, for example, is aware of that, if I'm in a space that's predominantly male voices, and the women's voices and the queer voices are being overlooked and not listened to. Now I'm going to use my point of privilege as a straight man to go like, oh, they're going to listen to me, so let me bring attention to the voices that are not being heard in the room. and that's now how I use my privilege
Right.
as well.
Mm.
You know, so there's that aspect of using your privilege as your invitation for others to pay attention as well.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thank you.
And it sounds like you have, your journey has brought you wiseness, your education. You've observed and educated yourself with these experiences.
Yes, and most of my learning came from messing up. Like, just gonna be clear.
Well,
From
does
making
it
mistakes.
about all of us? Isn't that what, I mean, that's what it's about, right? Shit
Absolutely.
becomes fertilizer.
Yes,
Yeah.
if you allow it to, but for
Yes.
some people, when
Yes.
they are told what you just did was wrong or it caused harm or whatever,
Yeah.
it's gonna be like, no, you're too sensitive,
Yeah.
or you know,
Defending.
defending, or sometimes, you know, the lovely
Becoming
new thought
small.
fence. You know, this is I, like I mentioned last week, I'm reflecting something in their consciousness that they're upset about. This is not about me, right? So we do that as well. So it only learning from our mistakes only works when we admit it's a mistake and we're open to listening to what others say to us.
Right.
So that's also my learning curve as well. Because part of the issue with learning more about a thing and, you know, writing about a thing and speaking about a thing and being looked at as somebody who knows things is that it's very tempting to believe that I don't need to learn anymore, right? Or that I don't have work to do. So there's a certain level of humility that has to come along with this for me to say, no, I still have learning to do. And realize that it's sometimes a very nuanced environment. So, for example, I'm sitting here on a call with, you know, 3 white women. I'm assuming you all identify as white, so I'm going to say that. So 3 white women. If you're not, please correct me. And that you also identify as women. So I'm sitting here having this conversation with the 3 of you, right?
Yeah.
So me as the Black person is here going, oh, you know, I gotta teach these folks something about whiteness, right? So I'm rolling in with that attitude, but then I'm also rolling in with the attitude of like, I'm a man. I need to shut up and listen to these women as well and learn from them, right? So where's the ebb and flow, the push and pull of that as well, and you know, can we all listen and can we all hear from each other? And folks listening to this might go like, yeah, but you just been talking a whole lot. Like you haven't paused for 5 minutes yet. And I'm like, okay, I was invited to be a guest. So this is a slightly different context. Maybe.
Yeah.
I was given permission, but by all means, please shut me up and say something.
No, I love that. And I love the self-awareness,
Yeah.
Ogun. You know, that for me is so powerful, and it highlights what you do and where you're coming from with what you do. You know, that you're not just having groups because you think it's important, that you have some experience, you have some self-awareness, you have some learning, life experience with it as well. So
one of the affinity groups. So as I mentioned last week, we do the affinity groups where, you know, one week a month on the first and third Wednesdays. The first Wednesday we stay in, you know, the big Zoom group together, and then the third Wednesday we divide up by race. And when I facilitate the group with Black and brown folk, so far the regulars in the group happen to be a bunch of older Black women. And I have learned so much from them. You know, I call them my crones, because to hear their stories, their experience, their point of view, their wisdom, it's a learning and teaching experience for me. Right. So and it's weird because they show up And they have mentioned on more than one occasion they show up to learn from me, and I'm like, learn from me, like, y'all, no, yeah, y'all been living life harder than I've been. I'm here to learn from you as well. So it's about learning from each other, listening to each other, but more importantly, believe in each other, and then also believing that in some way, shape, or form, we've all internalized some of these traits of oppression, and we also perpetuate some of the harms of oppression, and to believe that, and to always have a critical eye at our spiritual context, to go like, how is the spirituality and teachings themselves might be perpetuating these things. A good example of that, which I wrote about a couple times, and some folks, especially the first time I wrote about it, gave me the whole pushback, was I was talking about divine masculine and feminine, right? And noticing that when we look at these terms that usually affiliated with the divine masculine, and then terms that we usually affiliate with the divine feminine, they are strangely almost like reflective of a lot of the male and female stereotypes that we place on each other. So my thing was, did we just once again recreate God in our own image? One. Two, why did we just make God a binary? Like, we talk about how, God is not a person. God is a presence, right? But then we talk about divine masculine and feminine. We've just genderized God and created a binary. And we also throw these descriptors on each half of the binary that are suspiciously human, right? So I'm like, maybe we need to take a look at that, because it might be just perpetuating some of these, gender patriarchal stereotypes. So how about, instead of saying divine masculine and feminine, because some of the pushback I got was like, but we have all these traits in us. They're in us both. I said, great, then stop dividing them by saying divine masculine and feminine. How about we say divine queerness? How about maybe we even stop putting human attributes onto God in the first place, onto divinity, onto spirit? Stop trying to describe and use words. And I understand where it comes from, right? Yeah. Because it's how we attempt to understand. I understand the role that exemplifying divine feminine may have played in spiritual contexts, whereby the masculine was always seen as higher, as top of the hierarchy. Right. Where for many traditions, God is male. So I understand it serves a purpose. So it wasn't me saying we got to get rid of that or it's wrong. It's me saying we're teaching this. Let's ask a deeper question about perhaps there is some unintentional harm and perpetuating of patriarchy that comes along with the teaching. Right. So do we need to revisit it, retool it, rename it, get rid of it? Like, what do we need to do? Is anyone even open to the question? And most people were like, nope, don't take that from us.
I think we're a little more open in CSL because I tend to use it. Even when I'm reading Ernest Holmes' writings, or if I'm reading the Fillmore's, I take the him out and I'll just put it.
Us too.
Phrase because, and also with some of the songs where it's brothers and sisters, it's like, no, it's family. I changed that to family. Again, trying to acknowledge people who are non-binary, just looking at all the little ways, like I'm really working on myself to examine all the ways I cause separation. And that's why I have pronouns on the screen as well, is, just letting people know that there's an understanding of that and acceptance of that, and you get to be who you are, whatever that is for you.
Awesome. So, Ogun, I have a question. You've mentioned so many different articles. Where can people find these articles if they want to read them?
So you mentioned my website. I would rather you go to revogun.net.
Okay.
That's a simple like landing page with all the different places you can go. revogun.net. From there, I have the links to 2 articles of me writing on this subject that actually won a couple of awards.
Mm-hmm.
There's a link to my Substack, which is like a newsletter / blogging platform called Necessary Trouble. And there's a link to that. There's a link to Project Sanctus. There's a link to my coaching website. I do spiritual, grief, relationship, and men's coaching, ahimsa liberation coaching. So there's a link to that too. There's a link to videos I've made. You can find me all over social media.
Right.
You know,
all
the except formerly Twitter. I left that hellscape a while ago, but you can find me on all of them: Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, TikTok.
Wait,
LinkedIn,
gosh, mentioning names I haven't even heard of yet.
all the places. So Threads and Blue Sky were like Twitter alternatives. So when Elon Musk bought Twitter, turned it into X, and people are like, and he gave a voice for all the voices of oppression, right? People like we need an alternative.
Right.
So Threads was created by Facebook. It's got its own problematic things because it's run by Facebook. Blue Sky is another what we call decentralized platform that's kind of like Twitter. There's some other more niche ones, Mastodon, all the things. I'm not on that one, but search my name, you'll find me. I'm the only Ogun Holder floating around. Trust me.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We're down to our last 3.5 minutes. And so what I'd really like to hear, Ogun, is what is one thing you would really like people to take away from this? If they didn't get anything else, that they would get this.
I think I said it last week, and I'll say it again this week. It's not a question of if you're perpetuating harm. It's a question of how.
How, yeah.
How, and begin to take a deeper look at that, regardless of your spiritual practices, your age, your orientation, your skin color, whatever, because it is the culture we were all born into. We've all internalized elements and traits of it. We all perpetuate it. It affects how we think, move, speak, have our way, have our being. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of how. And realize that until we do our work both individually and collectively, we're still gonna get more of what we're getting right now. Right. And when people ask, how did Trump get reelected? He got reelected because in the last few years, people with the rise of racial awareness and DEI initiatives and programs, people were not willing to stay in that discomfort and push back against it. Real quick, I just read a headline that infuriated me yesterday. It was that Walmart has decided to scrap all its DEI programs and initiatives. Walmart, the biggest retailer and employer in the States, said, we're done with that. Wow. Right? And it, like other companies, it's been caving to the pressure of folks who said, we want to maintain the status quo.
Wow. Wow.
So the work's not done. There'll be more work to be doing, especially in the next 4 years. So here we are.
A lot of ways to go for sure. Cheryl, do you have a final? We've only got about a minute.
I agree with Ogun. There's a lot of work to do. Do the work. And information like this, I mean, learn about what's going on out there and where we are unconsciously perpetuating, because now it sounds like even if you shop at Walmart, you are contributing to that divisiveness.
Absolutely. Mark, what have you got?
I don't shop at Walmart, just saying. I want Ogun to come back again because there's just so much. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just, my final thought is just remembering that we all are perpetuating harm in some way or another, and we need to get comfortable with our discomfort, because that's where we need to live for the next little while. Thank you, Reverend Ogun. You're amazing. Thank you, Cheryl and Mark. I love you both. I love you all. Love you, Ogun. And I want to have you on my Joy Show as well. And for those of you watching, like, share, and subscribe, and share this. It needs to get out there. You're watching the New Thought Media Network, and this is Out of My Mouth. We'll be back next week with more interesting conversations. Bye for now.